Howdy, hackers, and welcome to another episode of FairLight TV. And we are doing our very best to sort of counterweight the rather heavy C64 bias in the channel. So this is one for you Amiga guys. Amiga guys! Yeah, as it's supposed to be pronounced. So last week we had the first half of the interview with Phil, also known as Galahad of FairLight, and we will do the second half this week. So over to the interview with Phil.
If someone by accident can crack it,
but then they only stop the casual ones trying to do an X copy and successfully doing so. So they needed to stop that. But then beyond that, it was probably too difficult for in most cases. I mean, if you find that this is not a valid copy, just putting a sign up saying we will not work. Sorry. That's just dumb, because then you can start searching for that as well. The better option would always be that the game works, but you up the skill level to ludicrous, or you have something that eventually would kill you, so you can never pass a certain stage of the game or something. That's a better implementation, because it's so much more difficult for any cracker to find that. My favorite is alternate reality the city on the 64. So it does a compare a section of memory that should be in some state, and if it's not there, it will deduct. So you get tired during the game, and then you go to a hostel and sleep. But if the protection is still active, you are not renewed during the night, so you can only last a few days before you just die. So but it takes quite long before you realize that. And of course, basically nobody understood before the crack was out, and it was the predominant crack on the scene, and the crack was basically unplayable for most gamers.
Yeah, there was quite a few Amiga games that were like that. I mean, there was Gods by the Bitmap brothers. If you just copied the disc, it would carry on and it would let you play the game, but monsters would be ridiculously difficult to kill. You couldn't pick up extra lives. And then I think before you get to the end of level Guardian on World 1, something ends up killing you. But it's a good idea, because to a cracker that's just who thinks they're confident and they've cracked the copy lock and they haven't been caught out by anything, it is because I think actually there's a group called Anti-piracy released it, and they didn't think there was any protection in the game, so they just released it as it was with a crack show on it. And of course people are going, man, this game is really, really hard. And then people realize there was a crystal version, and they're playing that, and they're like, oh, yeah, there's something wrong with the Endless Piracy version. That's not right at all. Ocean did it with a game called Hook, where if it failed well, actually, that was, I don't know who in Ocean it was that who implemented it, but they must have known how we were getting past copylock, because copylock is a trace vector decoder protection. It's all encrypted. And what it does is, as it's running, it decrypts itself line by line, executes a line, re-encrypts itself, so you never actually physically get to see the code. It was very, very popular on Amiga and Atari ST. But we'd figured out long ago how to decode it, so that we could actually see the exposed code within the copy lock. And then obviously the usual trick, because sometimes copy locks can have some extra stuff in them, what you would do is you would get the serial key for the copy lock, and you'd hardwire it into the key. You'd bypass all the read routines and just have it go to the end of the copy lock. So anything it needed to set up in the game, like protection related, it would automatically pass and do what it needed to do. It thought it had read the disk and been given the genuine serial key.
Yeah, you populate A0 with the relevant key, and then you're done. remove everything else.
What it was doing is it was actually modifying addresses in the game, which you couldn't see because it was all within the encrypted copy lock.
Okay.
I mean, the usual old school way is you would never need to decrypt it. You would just, on the copy lock header, you would write the serial key to D0, branch around the entire copy lock and not let any of it execute. And at the end of that copy lock routine would be a stupid compare for the serial key, and you knew you'd had it cracked. Later ones, they did different stuff where it would put the serial key somewhere else or a different register, or it would have some special calculation routines within the copy lock, which had to be executed so that it would modify the correct addresses in the game code. So you could no longer just put the serial key into D0 and branch around the copy lock. Now we were decrypting the copy lock, modifying the copy lock read routines in the copy lock itself, re-encrypting it back, but the only difference was, as far as it was concerned, it was testing the actual proper protection, but it was skipping the actual disk check routines. So everything would be set up in memory. Thank you very much. That's very nice of you, Rob Northern. But somebody in Ocean figured out what we were doing, and they put some extra stuff in the read routines, knowing that we would decrypt the copy lock, bypass the read routines to go straight to the end of the copy lock code, which would then modify stuff in memory, which meant that hook didn't work. It removed 3 objects from the game, and it being an adventure game, it was impossible to complete.
Okay.
And it was only when you analysed the copy lock code that, because the disk code had been skipped, there was the extra routines that it needed to execute, which would have cracked the game. So yeah, there was quite a few games out there that that did do sneaky stuff, but there was too many of them where they would just hang in an infinite branch or something, which is stupid, because even the most casual layman cracker who's just messing around might decide, oh, I wonder what happens if I jump to that bit of code after the infinite branch. I wonder if the game will the game's carried on. And it should never be as easy as that. It should never be. But you know, it was either get stuck in a dead end loop, or it was crash the Amiga. Well, there's no surprises there. If the Amiga's crashed, you've missed something. You're going to go back straight away and check it. You're not going to go, oh, it was probably my computer. You're going to go back and you're going to go and do it. So
even if your Q&A wasn't that thorough, if it totally breaks, you want to test it at least one more time to see if it was just like a temporary fluke.
Yeah, you want to make sure it's the game that's at fault and not you. And let's face it, 9 times out of 10, it's the cracker at fault, and he still hasn't finished his job. So, so yeah, I mean, you had some people who did protections that, like Richard Applin, who wrote the protection for Shinobi and Double Dragon 2. He was all about crashing the Amiga, which was silly because you always knew that you hadn't done enough if it was still crashing. You know, those that would get them stuck in dead-end loops, which was easy to bypass. And then you had those that gave it a bit more thought and removed things from the game, but didn't make it obvious. So you're playing a game, you're like, yeah, I don't think there's something right about this. But, you know, games like Gods got released because they thought that there was no protection. So, yeah, you know, protections can sometimes work. They really can.
On the C64, bounces, I think it was bounces. If that one detected that you fiddled with it, it formatted the disk. Thank you very much. I had my utility disk in the drive when that happened. So I lost my utility disk. Low level formatting, just bang.
Yeah, you've got to be quite brave to do that, because there's just so many instances where someone's pissing around with an action replay or something, and the next thing you know, it's just overwritten his original disk, and you're like, oh, what the hell? I don't think that was ever encouraged on the Amiga. I think because it would just cost too much if someone could prove that them just being nosy in memory was enough to trigger something like that. And I mean, there was lots of nasty copy protections out there, but nothing ever as bad as the worst one that's kind of similar to that, I would say, is there was a game called Hired Guns by Psygnosis, and if the protection wasn't cracked properly, it would overwrite the save file. So you could get quite far in the game, and then the next time you went to go and save it, it would. I think it used to save a message saying pirate copy or something, rendering the save game completely and utterly useless. But obviously, it meant that it didn't destroy the original discs or anything daft like that. But I think that's sometimes triggered by accident as well, that particular one. So there might have been a lot of pissed off people.
Well, for what I've heard, it would be that Dragon's Lair is sort of the most difficult one, because it used the disc to the absolute fullest and everything was super compressed as well. And so if you cracked it, you would need to add like multiple additional discs, because there was no way in sort of DOS format that you can stuff that much into it as they did on the original. That remained uncracked for so long, and then you had special copy programs for Dragon's Lair coming out.
Yeah, I think the problem for Dragon's Lair is, whilst there's no doubt the protection on it was good, I think for a lot of crackers in the day, and especially I think it was about 1989 when it got released, the Amiga was really getting a lot of games. Potentially a cracker could be expected to maybe crack 2 or 3 a day. Dragon's Lair wasn't a particularly good game. I mean, Dragon's Lair really was just a fancy animation player, which to show your friends who, had never seen something like that before. I'm sure it was great to see people go, bloody hell, you've got a cartoon on your Amiga. But the problem is it wasn't a great game, and I think that was part of the problem. I don't think it's because some of the crackers of the day couldn't do it, because Robert Cortex was active at the time, Eurosoft was active at the time, and both of those guys, without a shadow of a doubt, could have taken on Dragon's Lair and cracked it. The problem is, how much effort do you want to put into a game which a lot of people are going to be like, 6, 7 discs of that? No, you're right, mate. I'll have 6 separate games instead. I'm not wasting my time with that. Dragon's Lair might be all right as a showcase for the Amiga, but as an actual game, it was shit.
Yeah. But it would be more targeted at people who liked it in the arcades and they wanted the arcade experience at home, I guess. So.
Yeah, but I just don't think there's enough of those kind of people out there. I mean, the protection was good. There's no doubt on the protection was good, but there's been excellent protection on lots of other games as well. But they were games that people actually wanted to play. I mean, WHD Load is like a project to get Amiga games off floppy onto hard drive, make everything hard drive installable. And I've cracked some difficult ones for WHD Load. At no point have I been tempted to bother with Dragon's Lair. It's for the simple, I don't need to prove to myself that I can do it. I would just wonder why I'd wasted my time doing it, because it is just basically an animation player. It's worse than the sections in God of War on the PlayStation, where it tells you what button to press during some of the action sequences and that. I'm thinking, why would I want to play a game like that? Why can't I just, trial and error, find out what I've got to do, than having my hand held and being told what to do at the right time? That's not a game. That's just, it just seems childish to me.
Well, there is such a game. It's called Simon, right? The red, blue, and yellow and green, and you need to press them in the right order. If you combine that with a cartoon, then you have Dragon's Lair.
Yeah, but it's obviously Dragon's Lair is a lot more limited. It's just like, push left or push right and take a chance, and And then there's obviously the playtesting of the damn thing. You could be there for maybe 3-4 days doing this game, and you're at the end of it, you're thinking, is anybody actually going to play this? It's like I've recently done a game for Scoopex, that had quite an inventive copy protection. The game is kind of so-so, but the problem is it's a light gun game. This programmer has put all this effort into stopping the game from being copied, and this is another one of those cases where he's filled all of 512K of memory up, and he's got checksums, and he's got dynamic loading, and he's got different sync marks, and he's got different size tracks, but it's a light gun game. How many light guns were sold on the Amiga? Why have you gone to all this trouble to protect a game that maybe only 400 people in the world legitimately can actually play? It's
the light gun itself is like a dongle protection. You need to have one of those to play the game. If you don't have it, it's totally useless.
Yeah, well, not calling this programmer because he went right to town to make sure that this game wouldn't be cracked. So I'm thinking, you just wasted your time. Why didn't you put those efforts into a proper commercial title that everyone could get to play, that no one needs a light gun to play? And Dragon's Lair is a little bit the same kind of thing. It's like it was the wrong game to put all those copy protection ideas into and to make it so difficult, because the actual game itself is it's just not interesting. Just not interesting. But yeah, it was a difficult game for the very reasons that you outline. Is it was already on like 5-6 discs, and that data was on MFM discs, and they were never going to fit on normal Amiga DOS discs. And it was a disc swapping nightmare as an original. And obviously the programmer knew it was going to be a disc swapping nightmare when it was cracked. Plus there was all the stuff that he did as well, using the blitter to do decryption and stuff like that. You know, he knew what he was doing, but just I think he wasted his time on the wrong game, unfortunately.
Right. I'm not sure if this is correct. I don't know the name of the guy, but it said that the Dragon's Lair protection guy, is the same guy that protected word processor, paperback writer on the C64, and that is allegedly one of the more difficult cracks you can do on the 64. It has because also like a utility program, you can hide stuff inside routines very far in, and you don't necessarily, even if you test all the functions you are aware of in the program, you might miss one. So there is also this silly check that it checks the sound register when you print. So you want to print on a physical printer, and it checks the sound register. If that isn't 0, the program crashes. So you can't print using the pirate copy. If you played like an intro before the actual typewriter kind of program, or word processor kind of program, it's yeah.
It would surprise me because the guy who did Dragon's Lair, he also went on to do Bleem, the PlayStation emulator, Randy Linden. And he's a very, 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 very clever guy. So it wouldn't surprise me if he'd done stuff on a C64. But that is some out of the box thinking. Right, they're going to stick a crack intro on this. It's going to have music. The sound registers are still going to have data in them when they shouldn't. I'm checking, but it's a bit of genius. I mean, we were lucky on the Amiga that we had read and write registers, so they wouldn't have been able to check for stuff like that. But yeah, you know, there was some inventive stuff done on the Amiga. There was a couple of crackers that protected some games, like Jurassic Park was by Ocean was protected by an X-Crystal cracker, and unfortunately FairLight screwed that one up, and Paradox also screwed that one up. I can't remember which way round it was, whether or not FairLight screwed up the OCS version and Paradox screwed up the AGA version, but basically whichever version it was that came first, then the guy that wrote the protection for Ocean was able to put a message into the AGA version, I think it was, basically taking the piss out of all the groups that hadn't cracked it properly. So it's a shame, unfortunately, that Fairlight got name checked on that one, but I did that one to see how long it would take me, And it took me off and on about 7.5 hours to do it. And he had loads of great ideas in there. Absolutely loads of great ideas. You know, but that's the problem with the Amiga scene. You absolutely cannot spend 7.5 hours playtesting the game to make sure that it's done. I mean, bearing in mind that the MFM format was Rob Northern's PDOS and his copy lock, but it was the checksums he put in there. It was subtle little bits of code in the boot block, which he knew that if a cracker was a little bit too slapdash, he wouldn't implement this one piece of code which would knock out the password entry routine, which means none of the codes would work. He had copy locks in there that were written backwards, and then they'd be copied to their final destination the right way round. Each copy lock did something different in memory, different memory addresses. It wasn't just about values being returned into data registers. It was physically modifying addresses and stuff. Loads and loads of checks. God, it got to the stage it was getting quite boring. It's like, fuck, another check. You know, especially as it would take quite a long time to get to that stage to play test it, and the damn thing would crash, or you'd get annihilated by velociraptors, and you're like, oh, this can't be right. These are too bloody tough. And you go in there and you find out that you'd missed another one. You're like, oh Jesus Christ. That kind of slipped under the radar, where there was no mention of it in magazines whatsoever. And yet you had the absolute debacle that was RoboCop 3, which was Ocean's triumphant fight against pirates and crackers, and it was absolutely useless. Jurassic Park was far better at copy protection than RoboCop 3. You know, they wasted their money on that one. Absolutely wasted their money.
So I've only done like one thing on the Amiga. I had an action replay in an A500, and then I traced myself through, and this was Spy versus Spy. And then I was absolutely sure it loaded all the segments it should load, and now it's about to start the game, and I am in my action replay. And I had no idea how to proceed from that. I mean, on the 64, I would isolate this part of the memory, like starting here, ending here, saving that to disk, crunch it, and I would be done. But on the Amiga, once you can't do it like that, right? I mean,
well, no, it all depends on the game and how it's written. Like, for instance, Monkey Island 2 uses Amiga DOS to allocate memory, load up files, relocate the files to that, you know. So, you know, for something like Monkey Island 2, if you wanted to crack it, you could never ever assume that the code is ever going to be in the same memory address. That's just not the way that an Amiga DOS game would normally load. But like Stunt Car Racer, which loads in one hit, is always in the same place, is hard coded to only run at that place. So what you were attempting with Spy versus Spy for something like Stunt Car Racer absolutely would work. In fact, had you taken on something like Stunt Car Racer, you would probably be tackling it in the exact same way that you would do some of the Commodore 64 stuff. But I've not tackled Spy versus Spy, but I think, if memory serves me correctly, that's got lots of nasty code in it, and it's not nice to walk through the code, and it's been done deliberately to try and make it harder to crack. So, you know, you picked a hell of a first game to have a look at and try and do. But yeah, if you'd have taken like an early British game from, say, like 88 to 90 that loaded in one hit, or maybe did a copy lock check and then decrypted the main game code file and then would then later load levels, what you're suggesting that you try to do with Spy versus Spy would invariably work on a lot of those games. But obviously, as you know, more Amigas got released with different configurations, you know, some games companies started to cater for hard drive owners, and really you don't want to be loading up absolute code on machines like that. You want the system to relocate it and do it all as system friendly as possible.
Yeah.
Maybe looking at the system for after it's loaded so that you've got the full DMA time for your fancy effects and what have you. So it all depends on the game, how it's been written. I mean, there are some Amiga DOS games that you could force to work in a memory address, but you probably have to ensure that that was only on a 512K machine, which you would then know it would then work on a 1 meg machine. But you would never set out to get a game that ordinarily would run on any memory type, but only force it to work on one memory type. That would be a big no-no. People would be like, "What the fuck? What are you doing?"
Yeah.
You know, if you deliberately forced it to only work with slow memory, but not with 1 meg of chip memory, people would be like, "Get this rubbish off the boards. Delete it now. This is shit."
Yeah.
You'd be expected. Your routines would be expected to be intelligent enough, right? If you're going to insist on using extra memory, then your code has to take advantage of the different memory ranges, so that it's transparent to the user. They don't have to do anything. Right. So what you try to do with Spy versus Spy isn't wrong. It's just you pick the wrong game to try it with, because from what I can gather, Spy versus Spy is like a lot of early games, like a lot of early EA games. They've got nasty code in them as well, and they're written deliberately. It's almost as if like a C compiler or something has chucked a load of extra stuff in there that doesn't need to be in there, and it will obviously it helps hide the protection routines and makes them less obvious and makes them more difficult to crack.
That's actually the case for EA games on the 64. They wrote pieces in BASIC and then compiled it. So you would have this pseudocode kind of thing. So the protection for code wheels and manual protection and all of that, they were typically encoded in BASIC. And so it's if you can read machine code, you couldn't read that because it was just gibberish.
Yeah, there was quite a few of those on the Amiga as well, where they would obviously we call them interpreters, where they would have their own language within the machine code language to run the game, and it wasn't enough to go in there and remove bits of code. You'd have to like watch bits of code for certain events to come up, and then intercept them so that you could force maybe a protection code to be a specific code, so that, and he would say on screen to the user, make sure you type 007 as the protection code because you forced it. Because with the interpreter stuff, you would try to avoid removing any code, because it was quite easy for their interpreter, for that code that you've removed, that's essential for another function. It's not just for protection. So, I mean, there was a few level 9 games that had interpreters, and what I did is I latched onto a piece of code that ran every single frame, and at an offset, I knew that the protection numbers would eventually appear, and the counter for how many protection attempts you'd have, and then once they appeared, I was then able to transparently inject a different code in there, which had already been told to the user at the start, at the protection check, type them or Merlin or code, and then you were guaranteed it would always pass the protection check. Yeah, it was quite surprising. There was quite a lot of interpreter-based protections on the Amiga, and I think everyone found them quite difficult, because they were normally reserved for like adventure games and stuff like that. And some of these adventure games could be like on 5-6 discs, could take quite a while to load up. Yeah. And if you haven't got a hard drive and you're loading it off floppy, every single time you get it wrong, you've got to reload it, and you could be there quite a while trying to figure out, because sometimes you are literally just presented with right, where the hell do I start with this? And you're just looking for stuff that's changing and putting stuff in there to see if you can influence stuff on screen to change. And sometimes it can take a very long time to do. I don't know whether or not they ever thought, oh, this will bugger up the crackers, or whether or not they just thought, well, this is an easy way of implementing protection. Just make it part of the interpreter language.
But for Electronic Arts, they were actually doing. I'm pretty sure they did it to make cracking of it more difficult, because this was only basically the start that did that, and it did other things as well in the package. So you couldn't just kind of ditch it and start the game right away. You needed to go through it. But there are kind of decompilers, so you could convert that into BASIC. I've done my own parser that takes the interpreter would be kind of the virtual machine that runs it, and then the P code is sort of the data that runs through the interpreter or the virtual machine. And so I've done parsing of one of that format, and I can sort of read it like if it was BASIC. And then I understood how to kind of make my own command. So I could actually kind of patch the pseudocode. I didn't need to patch the interpreter in any way. I guess this is like Java works on a modern machine, where you would have the virtual machine, and then the actual Java code looks like gibberish if you don't understand what it is. So because it's not like machine code, it's sort of a script that runs through the virtual machine, and the virtual machine knows what to do with it.
Yeah, I'd imagine it, especially when some of these Java apps can be quite massive. You know, we'd be harking back to the days of 512k Amigas, but you know, back in the day, a 512k Amiga with an interpreter protection, it was still a big task. Yeah. It's just now just got a bit bigger. But yeah, I mean, it was always interesting. That was the thing I liked, was doing something that was different, because no cracker in the world, well, at least I don't think any cracker in the world likes to be given a game, and then within 2 minutes, it's cracked 100%, because they can see that the developers made no effort whatsoever. And then you're like, oh, is that it? That was rubbish.
Yeah.
I mean, some people use the argument that if you give the crackers a challenge, they'll work harder at it. But I'm thinking, irrelevant. You're protecting your product. You're trying to stop me from cracking it. You want me to release a version that's shit.
Yeah.
So put some effort into it.
Yeah.
So it was always nice. I didn't mind doing interpreters, MFM, track read routines, document checks. I didn't mind what it was. It was just nice sometimes to come across something that wasn't bloody Rob Northern copylock.
Yeah, well, I mean, the effort would be the same if the game is good or if it's bad. But people tend to appreciate your crack more if you did it for a good game, even if that crack was easier than a difficult one you did on a shitty game. The interpreter I did for this basic compiler, that was on a shitty card game, and nobody would ever play it. I'm sure I played it more than everybody else in total in the entire global population. But yeah, I still appreciated doing it because I knew it was difficult, and so I had to do it for myself. I would never do it for anybody else, because I know for sure that they wouldn't appreciate it enough for the time I invested doing it.
Yeah, I think for the majority of the people, they just wouldn't appreciate it anyway, which is why I suppose that crackers were so revered back in the day, because they literally had no comprehension as to how it was that these guys had cracked a game. They'd stuck an intro on it. I mean, they couldn't even see the directory of the disk. I've put it for a directory utility, and there's nothing even on there. And yet there's a game on there, and then these guys have got their intro on there, and it's cracked, and I can play it for free. And it's, you know, I just don't think, to the average Amiga user out there, they've got no comprehension whether or not it's just a simple copy lock that took you 2 minutes, or whether or not it was a game that took you 2 days, because you had to be damn sure that there was no protection left in it. I think it's only something really that fellow crackers can appreciate, you know, when they say, oh yeah, I looked at that one and I didn't fancy taking that one on. I just didn't have enough time. Well done.
Yeah.
It's nice when you get plaudits from other crackers that have seen or know what it is that you went up against. But the average person who was into the Amiga stuff, they didn't have a clue. I mean, they were happy that they got this game, and it took 2 minutes to do.
Yeah.
But to them, it was beyond them. So,
yeah. Phil, super nice talking. This has been 90 minutes already, and I'm sure my German friend doing the editing will scratch his head trying to make something out of this. It would probably be like 3 episodes, if not 4. But I don't know how he will try to edit that into something that will be in digestible format. But it has been super nice talking to you, and a fellow nerd doing the same sort of trade. There is basically no end for how long we could talk about itty bitty details of how to defeat the compiled basic shit and stuff like that. But I'd be happy to do that again. But next time, I can promise you I would like to do it over a beer. So let's try to do it over a beer sometimes, and without video, so no recordings of it.
Right. Great to speak to you.
Super nice. Thank you, Phil, and all the best. And keep doing good stuff for the Amiga. The platform really needs it. There are very few dedicated people to the Amiga platform still around. There are actually more on the 64, I would say. So you are much needed on where you are.
Yeah, the C64 scene is bigger than the Amiga scene. Unfortunately, with the Amiga scene, sometimes is people just expect just a little bit too much from people, and sometimes they're not very appreciative. And sometimes when you see some of the things that people on the Amiga say, you can understand why people go, "Why do I bother?" Whereas on the C64, I'm not, to my absolute regret, I never had one back in the day. But to see some of the stuff that's appearing on the machine, and just when I think that every single demo idea has been done and there's nothing new, then I see something by FairLight on the C64, I'm thinking, why the hell didn't I think of that? So
that's the way it is. You should do demos on the 64 as well. That's it's a challenge. I lost my competitive edge in like 88, so I will never do a demo part again. I've done like 2, so and I think I'm done. I know that I will not have, at law school where I'm educated, we didn't do very much 6502 programming, so I will never know enough math to be doing anything relevant on the 64 except cracking. So I will do that.
Well, it's great to see that the new breed of FairLight members like Pitcher and that doing their thing, and I'm just staggered the ideas are still coming, and the C64 demo scene seems to improve of age. I mean, some of the graphics that are being done on it now are just, the Amiga is capable of great stuff, but it's only really the Commodore 64 that makes me think, holy crap, that really is awesome. So
it's all black magic.
FairLight and everybody else that's still getting involved, because I don't know where the hell you lot get your ideas from, but me
neither. Brilliant. I'm just happy it keeps coming, so that's all I can say. Super nice, Phil.
Speak again.
Thanks. Bye. All the best. That was everything for this week. That was the end of a very long interview with Phil Galahad. Thank you so much for taking the time, Phil. It was absolutely a pleasure talking to you. And I also think it came out really, really good. And I hope it will be enjoyed by our viewers. So thank you to our viewers for taking the time to view it, and feel free to comment or leave Phil a note or whatever you like in the comments fields down below, and we'll see you next week. So bye-bye.